The following is intended for informational purposes only. It is intended to supplement classroom training and documentation. It should not be relied on as a replacement or substitute for classroom training with a live expert instructor. This workshop uses process flow to create a custom registration form. This example registration form is for training purposes only. In no way does it replace the existing base registration form. Welcome to lesson 9 of this config tools class. Here we will be adding more functionality into the business object. This lesson is a little bit of a practice of taking all the different knowledge that we have learned so far and trying to take a new piece of functionality like adding an address and an address type to this registration form and use these techniques and use everything and create more functionality. So it's a little bit of a revision of what we've done and a good place to sort of stop and see how much we have learned. Along the way we will be seeing certain new things, creating a new business service. We've seen business service before, but here we'll be creating our own one. We will see other things like hiding sections through functions, but mainly a revision of what we have seen so far and more functionality based around adding into our registration form an address and an address type. So in this lesson we're going to add an address to our registration form. In order to control what type of address to create for this registration form, we have an address type that we have added to the process flow type, to the registration flow type. And so in this example, we have a registration form type, an individual one that is set for home. In fact, it's actually controlled by the person type. A person type can have a specific amount of defined address types, and this is set on the person type page, and here I can choose any one of those address types, and I've set for this particular individual an address type of home. So when I create a registration form, I will create a registration form for this individual using a home address, and then when I create the actual person, the address is going to be associated with it. So I've actually created one for individual for home. In the business I have left it empty. It doesn't have an address type, so when I create a person for this particular business using this registration form, then no address will be created. So when I actually edit this, I can show you how this will work. So as I was saying, if I change this to let's say to business, then I have a different address type. If I turn it back to individual, I have the home because that's what I've set on my person type. Now, when I create my registration form, let's have a look how that works. I now have a section called address, and it shows me the information related to the address. It has a country. The country is defaulted from the installation options, so my default installation options is the USA, so my country is defaulted to USA. I show address type, which comes from the registration form type, and if I actually look at state, I see all the states of the US. If I change this to a different country like Canada, I see a different list of states. Let me go ahead and fill in a fictitious address. I didn't fill in an ID. So now I see on my display map the address information. Now when I do validation, I'm going to do a validation not only on the ID and the name, which we previously saw, but I'm going to actually do a check to see whether this address exists in the system. In fact, I'm looking for an exact match on country, state, address, city, and postcode. If it exists, it will just return to me this address, and if not, it will create a new address for me. That's what's going to happen at the validation state. Okay, so I'm going to hit validate. And you can see that we have a new a new field here, address, and it's pointing to the address that I actually either I created or it found in the system. And then when I activate, I'm now going to create the user and associate it with the address that I just either created or found. So now if I go into my particular person, you will see that not only is my person there, I have my person ID, but also I have created the address. I've created the person address too. Okay, so this is the outcome of adding in the address to the registration form. And now the question is, what did I need to do in order to create this? What was necessary? So there's quite a few different things that were needed, and we're going to be going through them one by one. Let me go back to the BO, and what we're going to start with is looking at what was added to the registration form type BO. In fact, we're going to go through this list over here, which shows you everything that we needed to do. And we're going to be concentrating now, first of all, on the address type that we added on to the registration form type. And let's have a look. It's this field over here called address type, this particular element that we added. You'll see that this element is based on a field which is an extendable lookup field, and we fill in the data type that it's an extendable lookup and which particular extendable lookup it is. We have to make sure that we've also set the backing of the actual data to be, in this case, a CLOB. And then the question becomes, how do we create the drop-down? And we saw we had a drop-down of home if it was a individual, and if it was business, we had office. How is that done? We've already seen something similar, dependency, and we're going to show another type of dependency here. And what we have used is a business service which looks to find the person type valid address types. And we have to fill in the inputs and the outputs, and that way we have the drop-down working. Let's have a look for a moment about what this business service looks like. This business service is actually based on a query, direct query, which is coming from a zone. If we have a look at our schema, we can see that this is the actual business service it is the actual zone that is running and has the query that we need in order to actually find the address types, the valid address types for a specific person type. Okay, let me just show you the zone which is associated with that. We haven't necessarily looked too much at how we create queries in zones. This is an opportunity to do that. Without looking at all the details over here, what's important is the fact that we have this query which searches on the person and takes the person type address and picks up the address type, and it's making sure that and it has a where clause on the person type. Okay, so we're doing a join between the person type and the person type address type tables, and we're picking up the address type extended lookup. Now once we do that, we also have to use a business service which we are running over here. It says column 1 for SQL1. we're actually picking up and running a business service, taking the lookup to populate the description. Okay, so I'm not going into too much detail about how this works with a business service using a zone right this moment. I just wanted to point out where it is and how you can find it. Again, the business service is found directly on the BO, and the BO, when I looked at the business service, I was able to go and find the zone, which is in the actual schema. Okay, so this is the important information. Now, how do we know how to fill out the inputs and the outputs? Well, the inputs and the outputs, how we know how to fill this is actually looking at the API of the business service, looking at the schema. When I look at the schema over here, I can see what is the input. In this case, it's the person type. And the outputs are coming from, that's the description, and that's the address type. And that's what I fill in. That is what I fill in when I go to the address and I want to fill in this information over here. It's coming from the schema, the path that I just saw. Now, I've also created there's another method you could do. We could also use a service script to do something very similar as the business service. I have a service script over here which I created, retrieve address types for person type, and this is another way of doing it. And I can click over here, and I'm not going to save. I just want to show you with the service script that I created, which does something very similar to what we just saw. Here again, I create a schema which has inputs as person type and outputs address and description. But instead of running a business service and then running using a zone, which does the query, and then run a business on top of that, which does finding the description, I do this directly in a piece of code. And in the code over here, I am, if I actually copy this to Notepad, I can see that basically what I'm doing is running running the BO for the type, reading the person type BO, and on the person type BO I have a list of addresses, and for each particular address I'm running a BO to get using the address type BO in order to get the description. Okay, so you can look at that more at your own time. That is a different method of how to actually go ahead and do the drop down, either using a business service or a service script. I have chosen in my example a business service. Now, the thing which I haven't actually really shown to you is the fact that, let me go back to the business object. What I really haven't shown you is the person type. And maybe I should just go directly to person type. And there you will see what we have. For example, on the individual, we have the list of valid address types. And that's what I was picking up in the drop down. And in the case of business, we have the valid options being office. So again, what I was doing in order to get that drop down was either using a business service which uses a query off a zone to pick up the valid addresses, and the actual description had to come from a business service, or I did it through a service script doing something very similar. Okay, so I have shown you overall and quickly how to add in the address type, and that results in having the address type on my on my process flow type. So I've shown you that in our case the address type depends on the person type. We can use a business service or a service script. And now I want to go on and show you how we add in the address details which we see on the actual registration form. Now how is that done? Let's go to the BO of the parent registration form. And you will see that I have now a section here called registration form address. And this is the first time, I believe, that we are showing you, I've actually added it into the BO and not directly the elements directly into the business object, but using it via using a data area. Data area is a separate, distinct subsection of elements that I can create separately from the BO, and then I'm able to use it in whatever way and add it to a business object. So in this particular case, all these elements that you see over here are actually not directly added into this BO, but they're added via using a data area. So if I go to that data area, you will see in its schema, you will see the list of those particular elements. And even though these elements are not backed by database, it's not by a maintenance object, they are standalone, nonetheless, I still can actually I can associate them with the actual data. In other words, under country, I can say it should be mapped to a map XML, which means that when I've added it into and use it in the registration form, it will back it on the CLOB in the registration in the process flow table. And in this particular case, you will see that I have added in country, I've added in the state. Country is actually has a drop down from a table directly called country, and state, in a similar way that we saw dependency between the country, that we saw dependency between the person type and the address type. Here as well, I have dependency in here as well using a service script called business service, called get country states. So I'm getting all the country states which are related to the country, and again I have to look up that business service and get its inputs and outputs to define the output state and description. One of the things that I have not mentioned here, but it's important to mention, we've shown it before, that whenever we have a dependency, we want it to be updated continuously, the field state based upon the country. So therefore I have to put in the dependent elements, in this case state. So I did something very similar above as well. Now if I go to the address over here, which is the section I've added in, you will see that I've added in a label. I've also, though, used something new called a conditional hide. I'm conditionally hiding this section called address based upon a function. Okay, this function actually is in a UI map, and we'll see that in one moment. We'll see where that UI map is, but we are basically deciding whether we actually show this address or not section based upon whether there is an address type defined in the registration form type. So just to show you what I mean by that, if you remember just to go to the process flow type once more, we see that the business does not have an address type defined. So when I actually go to my process flow and try to create a business registration form and use the business one, you will see that there is no section defined here for address. And that's because I'm, again, conditionally hiding it based upon whether the address type is defined in the type. And how do we do that? I'm going to show you now, because I'm showing you the data area, and I'm also pointing out that we have a fragment inside this data area, and this fragment is used to also show the address type on the maintenance map, and also on the display map on the registration form. Similar that we showed before, the ID type and format using a fragment. So here as well, I also have a fragment. And if I open up this fragment, you will see that I have defined just one field in the schema address type. And we have a address type defined here, but we also have here a little script, and this script is responsible. This script show address is basically saying if no address type is defined, okay, then return false. And if there is an address type defined, return true. Now, we have yet to see how we actually add the address type to the registration form. This particular function is simply saying, well, if there is no address type defined, then leave it empty. It is up to us to actually move the address type from the registration form type to the registration form itself. And if you remember, we did that before previously with the ID type and format using a pre-processing script and the display map server script. So that's going to have to go hand in hand to actually populate the address type, and we'll see that in a moment. But anyway, the main point here is that I have defined in one particular place a data area which holds all the right information that I need: the country, the state, the address, which is just address 1 field, city and postal. We have some dependency between state and country. I've added in a fragment to show the address type, and I also have address ID. If you remember that when I actually created or checked for a new address, the address was populated on the form, and that's where I do it using the address ID. I add in the address ID, and we'll see that in the code in a moment. Now, the benefit of using a data area, there are quite a few different benefits, but one of them is the fact that I have been able to add in this whole section address in a very simple way. If I actually look at the code, the schema source view, you will see that I've added in the data area and it's placed over here. And it's very simple to realign or move around different elements once you use data areas. If you set up your elements in data areas, you can change around the ordering. Very, very simple. So if I wanted to, I could actually take that out and I can move in one little go the area for showing the address now above the ID. And if I actually go now back to you'll see now my address is above the ID, and if I go back to my process flow, I'm not sure if I have my process flow over here, but if you could, wait a second, if I actually go to my, no, I don't see my process flow, but let's say if I create a new process flow, you will be able to see the rearranged order of the sections. Okay, so far what I've shown to you is we showed the address type, and now I've shown you how we used a data area to add in the address information, and we've shown that we're actually using a fragment for the address type. We have also mentioned that we are showing and hiding the section using a function, and also I pointed out that we also have an extra field called address ID, which is used to populate this section with the found or created address. Now, as I just mentioned right now, we still have to set the address type on the maintenance map and also on the display map to show the address type. And that's something which let me just show you where that is. If I go back to this is my registration form type. This is the parent registration form, and it is over here in my pre-processing that I have added in, first of all, into my schema, I have added in the address fragment. I have then added in my step, setting the address type and also defaulting the country. If I have a look over here, I'm showing you the code which I'm now using for the pre-processing in Notepad. And what I'm actually doing is saying that if the address type is set on the registration form type, then move in the address type onto the maintenance UI. So this will populate for the fragment, and that's why I see my address type showing up when I use my maintenance map. But not only that, I've also invoked a business service installations options, which takes the information of the installation options and picks up the default country and populates the country. And if you remember, we saw that it populates it with the USA, and that's because I'm running this business service. Of course, I'm going to have to update my data area as well with my business service for that to work. So we've seen that the service script, the pre-processing service script, sets the address type. It's also defaulted the country. And now, moving on to the display maps. If you remember, with display map service scripts are needed to show the address type there as well. And here, I'm going to have to do this not only not on the parent, because the parent registration form does not hold the display maps. So let me just show you where that is. It's this display map over here, and over here I've added in to the code, first of all, again in the schema, I've added in the address fragment, and in the code I have done something very similar. I have added in, basically moved in, set the address type. Here I don't default the country because that's only as a default, and here we're just displaying the information which has already been filled in. So I have to do that both on the individual and on the business, on the child BOs. So I've set the address ID. Other things that I've done is I've added some extra information into the validation algorithms. If I go back to my parent BO, so if you remember on the algorithm section here, I have a script for validation. And here I'm validating, and I'm validating now to check to see that this section over here I've added in, to check to see that data related to the country is filled in correctly. And this code over here is basically saying that you don't have to fill in a country if you don't want to. But if you don't choose, so if you don't choose a country, then all the other fields have to be blank. But if you do choose a country, then make sure at least one of the other fields is filled in. This is not necessarily that correct, that you would only want, let's say, one of state, postcode, or address to be filled in, but that's what I've done currently. So if I actually try and create a new individual registration form, and I have a state, let's say here, but I don't. If you see over here, now we've actually changed the order. Now we have address above ID. Let me just fill this in, otherwise this will error. If I actually just do this, add in only state, but let's have a look. Let's say I have no country like this. Now if I do that and I just set, let's say, address to be like this, this I think I put a validation. You must specify a country for an address, and if I actually go back to United States and I take this off, this will have a different error saying that you must specify more details other than country for an address. Once you have that, I believe just 2 fields, it will be sufficient, because that's the validation that I did in this particular case. Okay, so there's actually some problem over here that I need to see why this is not working. Looks like I actually have to fill in all the particular fields. Okay, I need to check to see if that's actually the way it's been working. Yes, in fact, actually, this is incorrect. If the country is filled in, then it says that we have to have all the fields filled in. If is equal to blank, any of the fields are blank, then error. So I need to have all of them filled in. Okay, so if country filled, then all other fields. That's better. And that's what it's doing. Okay, so we now have shown the validation. And now what we haven't shown is the 2 main plugin spots, which first of all check and create the address, and then another one which updates the actual person. So let's have a look at that. If I go to my parent BO and I look at my life cycle, you will see that I have added in the validated state a new plugin spot called check address existence. And this check address existence is what is doing the work to see whether this address already exists in the system, and if it does, then it just retrieves it, and if it doesn't, it creates it. And the code looks a bit like this. And what we're doing is the following. We're reading the BO of the registration form, seeing whether the country is filled in, meaning there is a country being added into the form. And if it adds, then I am actually using this particular business service to check to see whether an address of this type exists. If it does exist, then I just retrieve it. And I actually set it on my registration form, and then I update my form to save the address ID. If, on the other hand, it does not exist, then it creates a new one using the BO C1 address, and similarly at the end, it takes then the address ID and updates the BO. Here, just pointing out, sometimes we use there's fast update, or sometimes we have add or fast add. Difference between an add and a fast add, for example, is whether we actually return the ID, we populate the BO after we actually run the invoke. And since I actually want to get the ID coming back from the address, I therefore run it as an add. And then I get my address ID coming back, and then I can populate it in my registration form. Now this particular business service check address exists is my own. I created it myself. I want to just show that to you. Let's have a look at that business service for one moment. You will see that this is, in a similar way, a zone-backed business service, meaning that there is a query done directly in the zone. And if I look at the zone, looking just at the query itself, basically what I'm doing is trying to get an address based upon all the fields. I'm looking for exact match. Now, this not necessarily is correct. This was a simple way of implementing a check on the address. You could do it on only specific fields, but that's my particular implementation. So going back to my life cycle now, this is the algorithm plugin spot that I've done in order to create the address or check to see if it exists. So what you actually have in the sense of, we have here 2 enter plugin spots. I first of all check for the person's existence. If the person exists, it skips this particular second one and it will go directly to active, and it won't even create the address because the person already exists in the system. However, if that person does not list in the system, then it will go to the second algorithm, check to see whether the address exists. If it does, it will return it. If not, it will create one anew. So we have done the check or create address. I've shown that we put it on the BO status enter on the validation step. It creates, we created a business service to check for the address, and we at the end set the address ID on the form. Now, the last thing that I want to show is the changes that we had to make to the second plugin spot. Which is down here. And you see the script has been updated to version 7 over here. And the changes that I had to do over here are the following. I first of all need to pick up the address type from the form type. From the registration form type, I pick up my address type. And then what I do is, if the address ID exists on, is not empty, because I don't necessarily have to have an address. I could have a business registration form without an address. But if it's not empty, exists, then I fill in the particular list person address, putting in a plus over here, which creates a new list, a new instance of the list for the person address, adds in a sequence. In this case, it's just going to be one address. I'm setting it to be 10. I pick up the address ID, which I already have on my form, my address type, which I also have picked up for my registration form type. And there's also address priority and deliverable, which needs to be set. And I've set my the exact today's date to be the start date. So that is the last part of the code that needs to be touched in order that the address should work. So in summary, what we have learned in this lesson is basically many of the principles that we've seen in the previous lessons, all the technical algorithms and changes that need to support new functionality, and it's been combined into this particular added functionality of adding an address.